Morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear international friends. It is my honor and pleasure to greet you on the Security, Science and Peace Conference, an international conference organized by the Croatian Pugwash Group, a branch of the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs, in cooperation with the World Academy of Art and Science. The Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs strongly emphasize the importance of scientific evidence-based policymaking, the use of science and technology for the benefit of humanity, as well as addresses the nuclear disarmament and overall global security issues. It deals with contemporary hybrid threats, connecting science with decision makers, fostering academic dialogue, and responsible global governance. The Security, Science and Peace Conference is held under the high patronage of the President of the Republic of Croatia, Mr. Zoran Milanović, and within the platform Conference on the Future of Europe. We will have 6 panels in 2 days on the Croatian and EU peace and security policies, on science and security, nuclear disarmament and global security, on the role of the non-aligned movement today, emerging technologies, and space policies. But before we start, I would like to invite academician Ivo Šlaus, member of the International Committee of the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs, and honorary president of the World Academy of Art and Science, to address you with a welcome speech.
Good morning, dear friends, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, caro Paolo. Pugwash conferences on the world and Pugwash conferences on science and world affairs has been established in July of 1957, and that was just 2 years after the famous Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which was signed on July the 9th of 1955. But this is not really the beginning of these efforts. As a matter of fact, Leo Szilard, the same person, who is well known of writing the letter to President Roosevelt, actually started the campaign to secure that the nuclear weapons would not be used against Japanese cities. Of course, as we know, it did not work. It was used first against Hiroshima, and then at the opposition of many of its founders was actually also used on Nagasaki. But even before that, there were efforts by Leo Szilard to establish the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. He did it together with Eugene Rabinovich. And even is characteristic that President Truman and a person who really organized the development of the bomb, Oppenheimer, met for the first time in October of 1945. At that time, one of the first sentences Truman said was, "Now we have to see how to arrange the interest of the United States." Oppenheimer said, "No, we should first think about the interest of the world." He was fully aware that that is actually the only way to have nuclear weapons really under some sort of control. Of course, scientists worked during the Second World War, and even today, scientists in United States, in United Kingdom, in USSR, and of course, scientists in Germany and in Japan during the war. They, of course, do not have a nuclear weapons program now. Russell-Einstein Manifesto contains that famous sentence, Shall we put an end to human race, or shall mankind renounce war? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. Actually, during the Cold War, a doctrine of nuclear deterrence was developed. One of the initiators of that was Bernard Prodi. And then after that, of course, it developed the so-called mutually assured destruction, which has this strange acronym MAD, MAD. Rajiv Gandhi called nuclear deterrence as the ultimate terrorism, and of course that indeed is the ultimate terrorism. There are various assessments of how close we are to war and whether some countries are more peaceful than the others. The Economist and the University of Sydney developed the scale, and on that scale, which contains some close to 200 states, those countries that have nuclear weapons are at the bottom. Russia is 146, Israel is there at 137, and the same way with India, Pakistan, and so on. So the more weapons, nuclear weapons you have, and this shows once again that the old dictum, si vis pacem para bellum, if you want to have a peace, prepare for war, is no longer true. As a matter of fact, it is the opposite that is true. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist started in 1947, putting the doomsday clock on the front page, on its front page. And in 1947, it was at 7 minutes to midnight. Then it moved back and forth, and the farther from midnight, from the catastrophe, of course, was at the end of the Cold War. At that time was 17 minutes to midnight. How it is today? Some of you heard Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the meeting in Glasgow, but let me start by giving you first some of the data. During the last 100 years, starting, let's say, from the Belgian massacre in Congo until, let's say, the end of the Vietnam War, about 100 million people have been killed in wars. But, the number of people who died because of hunger, because of poverty, because of various destruction of their own governments, Gulag, Holodomor, extermination camps, and so on, is about 5 times bigger. Now we are faced not only with the destruction of humans, we are faced also with the destruction of the natural capital. And it is this destruction of natural capital that can again cause additional destruction of the human capital. And what we have now is, as a result of all of this, roughly almost 500 million, so 5 times more than during the war. And if the level of the sea would increase to, let's say, 0.5 meter, then the scenery of London and Sydney, and also here of Adriatic City, of Split and Zadar, will be devastating. And as a result of that, there will be huge migration, and it can be estimated that over 1 billion people would actually perish as a result of that. It is because of this two crises which really merge into one crisis, the crisis of the destruction of natural and human capital. Actually, the clock moved to 100 seconds to midnight, and it moved for 2 consecutive years. So this is the closest it ever was for such a long period. United Nations General Assembly on September 26, 2015, passed a document which maybe is the most important document entitled Transform Our World. We indeed have to transform our world to save it for humanity, to really assure, as let me repeat, the Russell Einstein Manifesto, we appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. We cannot fail, we have to succeed in assuring this transformation to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Academician Šlaus. I would like to invite now Mr. Paolo Cotta-Ramusino, Secretary General of Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs and Fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, to say a few words on behalf of the International Pugwash.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Very good. Thank you very much for the invitation. I will be very brief. I know we have a very long program today and tomorrow. Tomorrow, unfortunately, I cannot be with you. But I think it's very important, the issue of relation between science and security. You see, if you consider the risk that we are facing now, I would say there are three catastrophic risks that humanity is facing. One is the problem of global warming, and this is very much discussed today, even though the conclusions are not so clear. Then the second problem is pandemics, the possibility of a pandemic. And we are experiencing now exactly some of the risks related to pandemics. And the third one is a nuclear conflict. For various reasons, the issue of nuclear risk and nuclear conflict is something which is less present in the public opinion or in the press than the other two. So I think it's particularly important that we, who are, so to say, related to a long history of scientists involved in preventing nuclear war, we should be more active and, in fact, more present in the international public opinion on these risks. Let's make a few considerations about nuclear weapons and nuclear war. We have something very positive, which is, in fact, the number of nuclear weapons decreased. We had a maximum of 70,000. Now we are altogether 14,000. Also, another positive element is that no new nuclear weapon state have appeared. We are still 5, so to say, recognized nuclear power, which is China, United States, Russia, France, and United Kingdom. And then we have 4 nuclear weapon states, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, which in fact are not members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But we don't have any more countries which appear to be interested in acquiring nuclear weapons. And I think this is positive. But we have to remember something very important. And let's connect with the, in fact, the attitude of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which in fact is not telling us that the nuclear risks are fading away. And why this is? And the problem is that, you see, we have lots of conflicts in the world. we have conflicts in Middle East, we have conflicts in South Asia, we have conflicts in Northeast Asia. And also there is an antagonism, growing antagonism between Russia and the West in general, and particularly between China and the West. So we see the problem is that we are having lots of conflicts and antagonism in regions where there are nuclear weapons. Yes, nuclear weapons are less than before, but if you have even a limited use of nuclear weapons, say as an example between India and Pakistan, the consequence for the world will be dramatic. And I'm not talking the consequence of the war in the region only, but globally. So if you have an explosion, a nuclear explosion between India and Pakistan, then you have migration, huge number of people killed, and pollution which will be spread all over the world. And the consequence can be really dramatic. So what is very important, and that's the reason why I'm mentioning that, is that we have more and more people thinking about how to decrease the risk of conflicts, how to facilitate understanding and resolution of conflicts. And that's something which is really needed. And I think that that's exactly what Pugwash has been doing, in the last, say, 20 years or more, is to try to understand how local conflicts can be solved, and how can be the situation in certain places be improved. Are we optimistic? Unfortunately, I say no. I think that we have seen in all these regions that I mentioned, Middle East, South Asia, Northeast Asia, we have seen an increase of the antagonism, and we have seen recently an increase of risks of real conflicts. And I think that in that sense, it's very important that all international community give a contribution to understanding how to solve this problem. Croatia is a very important country. You had conflicts in the past. These conflicts have been solved, maybe not in the best way possible, but at least the situation now in the region is much better than it was, say, at the end during the 90s. So in this sense, I think that you had an experience how to go back from a conflict environment to a more livable and quiet environment. And in this sense, we appreciated very much the contribution of our colleagues from the region, Croatia in particular, so they have an experience of how to solve problems, and also, given the situation that we have seen in, say, in Belarus, Belarus and Ukraine, that you have shown how to go around to the traditional antagonism which have been left by the collapse of the, so to say, communist world. And I think that that's very important. And but of course, and in fact, you contributed to shift the antagonism in one region to a more peaceful environment. Can it be done the same in South Asia? Can be done the same in Northeast Asia? Can be done the same in the Middle East? We have to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cotta-Ramusino. Let us now hear Mr. Götz Neuneck, the representative of the European Pugwash Group, to address you with the welcome speech.
I hope you can understand me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Greetings to Zagreb, and of course, good morning, dear participants and Pugwashites and other colleagues listening to this Zoom broadcast. Dear presidents of Pugwash Croatia, Mr. Šikić and Mrs. Jerković, and of course, Ivo Šlaus, all trusted friend from our Pugwash Council. On behalf of the other European national Pugwash groups, let me congratulate you first for this highly interesting 2 days conference with important topics which have been on the Pugwash agenda for a long time. Balancing science and security, nuclear disarmament and global security, the role of non-alignment movements, and how to limit negative developments in space, and how to discuss ethical problems of science and security. Ivo, Šlaus, and also Paolo, Cotta-Ramusino just mentioned to the threats emerging in these times, so I don't have to stay here for this subject, but of course we are very pleased that with the help of Ivo and others, there are now new Pugwash activities in the very important Balkan region. As the Secretary General just mentioned, Croatia is an important country in the region, and I think we can learn from your experiences about conflict resolution. We all understand that the international world order is under pressure. Firmly established traditional arms control treaties are being abandoned or called into questions by member states. A power rivalry between main powers such as the US, Russia, and China is accelerating, and also we as Europeans have to discuss what that means for us and what can be done in these situations. Scientists in Europe, but also all over the world, have to deal with these challenges in the future, because the outcome has also ramifications to their own work and scientific life. It is encouraging that the Russian and also the Croatian Pugwash group organized hybrid workshops under the very complicated conditions of the pandemic. But this is always a good opportunity to exchange views, to identify problems, and I'm looking forward that these results would also flow into the next Pugwash conferences, hopefully in March in next year in Doha. We have to understand that science can do much for peace and common understanding by building bridges and by working across the borders, connecting people into a more fractured world. And let me quote Joe Rothblatt. He said, "Scientists can warn for further dangers that may arise for current discoveries. Scientists can form an international fraternity that transcends beyond natural boundaries, so that they are well placed to take a global view in the interest of mankind." We also know that scientists do understand technical problems better than average politicians or citizens, and knowledge means also responsibility. Scientists can provide technical advice and assistance for solving the incidental problems that may emerge. And under this perspective, I'm sure that these panels are well placed, that we can exchange interesting views. Again, let me greet all of you in Zagreb. We, of course, would love to be there, but with the help of modern technologies, we can connect each other and can try to record also these results and considerations to inspire other people for doing much more work on very specific issues. Again, congratulations, good luck for the next 2 days. And again, congratulations to the organizers to make that possible. Greetings from Germany.
Neuneck. And last but not least, the newly elected president of the Croatian Pugwash Group, Mr. Zvonimir Šikić, will open the conference with his welcoming words.
I'm very grateful to all the participants for their participation. And before we move to the panels, let me just very, very briefly remind you of the circumstances in which Pugwash originated and the especially important role of individuals. And I'll just present a few slides to. So, as you know, in January of 1939, at the meeting of physicists in Washington, Bohr brought from Europe the news of discovery of fission. The possibility of atomic bomb was immediately reported in newspapers, and everyone at the meeting was aware of the possibilities. But nobody suggested that ethical questions should be discussed. Within a few months, Bohr and Wheeler had worked out the theory of fission in America. And in the meantime, the possibility of the chain reaction had been experimentally confirmed, among others by Joseph Rotblat in Poland. And in this moment, all this was openly discussed and published. There was no secrecy at all. So I would say that in summer of 1939, it was the last moment to forestall the building of the nuclear weapons. Let me move to 36 years later, when we had discovery of recombinant DNA technology, which was presented as a similar challenge. The biologists promptly organized an international meeting at which they agreed to limit and regulate the uses of the dangerous new technology. And what I would like to stress is that it took only a few brave spirits, with Maxine Singer in the lead, to formulate a set of ethical guidelines which the international community of biologists accepted. So I suppose that the experience of the atomic bomb, of course, helped biologists, but we have to ask the question why physicists did not act in 1939. And I would say that perhaps they would have reacted if Joseph Rotblat, for example, has been there to urge them. They have the role of individual is very important. When war began, the chance of achieving an agreement of physicists disappeared. Everybody was afraid of Hitler. In West, they knew the German government had started a secret uranium project, and the fear allowed scientists to design bombs with a clear conscience. That is very important. And indeed, we have to admit that scientists persuaded the British and American governments to build the bombs. Hitler and Japan's military, we learned afterward in historical records, were never seriously interested in nuclear weapons. And Stalin was not seriously interested until he was informed of the seriousness of the American problem. So yet, when it became clear in 1944 that there will be no German bomb, and it was clear in 1944, and when the fear disappeared, Joseph Rotblat was the only one who left the Alamos project, the only one scientist, nobody else. And as you know, he became later the leader of the Pugwash movement, working tirelessly to unite scientists to undo the evils of Los Alamos. So this is this individual engagement, which is very important. Of course, we know that he and Pugwash movement got the Nobel Prize in 1995. He died in 2005 at the age of 96. And I believe that Pugwash continues in his footsteps. That was just a little bit of reminding of the importance on the individual engagement, which is always the crucial. So, and I would now like Anna to proceed, and that we start with our first panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šikić, for the opening of the conference. We will now start with our first panel, how can Croatia contribute to EU peace and security policies? In this session, we will see where the Republic of Croatia stands in terms of the development and effectiveness of security and peace policies, how it responds to security threats and crises, and what is its potential and actual contribution to the stability of the region of Central Europe, the Mediterranean, but also the entire European Union. What are the possibilities and challenges for a constructive dialogue with our neighbors and strategic partners, and what are the perspectives of further integration? We will hear from our speakers today. Our first speaker is Professor Ivo Josipović, former President of the Republic of Croatia, Fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, Professor Emeritus of the Faculty of Law at the University of Zagreb, and eminent composer. Professor Josipović is a holder of high decorations of several European states, Medal of Tolerance of the EU, and other prestigious awards in Croatia and abroad. Professor Josipović, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, I thank the organizer inviting me to speak on such important conference. I would like to start with thesis that the most important issue in foreign policy is to know your limits. Definitely, Croatia as a small state has some limits, having in mind the economical power, military power, human resources, whatever. But that does not mean that Croatia is without influence in international society, especially in the neighborhood, in the region. Firstly, I would like to remind that in theory, there are several types of states. Firstly, there are small states, small powers, and powers, of course, superpowers. Croatia started, of course, as a small state. That means that a small state having in mind their capacities are focused on specific goals. For Croatia, it was international recognition. It was, of course, membership to UN, then NATO, European Union, and other international organizations. As a tool, small states has multilateralism because multilateralism and the rule of law in international relations are probably the strongest tool for small countries. In principle, small states are concentrated on some specific issues, and in global relations, mostly they are oriented to policy of silence. That means not to interfere in some global issues because we cannot help, we cannot change things, and of course there is always dangerous to have some important enemies because of our position. And always small states in principle have some patterns in international relations. Croatia is a good example. We had support of United States, we had support of many European countries, and that make Croatia as a successful small state transforming from the very beginning of not recognized country at all till member of European Union. Being small power does not mean, of course, military. It means state that can international relations modify surrounding, and small power can interfere in several goals and several topics on international scene. As I understand Croatian position in international relations, we are something in the mid. We are transforming little by little from small state to small power. The best opportunity for Croatia to increase importance in international relations is, of course, European Union and the regional policy. Unfortunately, up to now, we haven't been successful in completely transforming our position, especially because situation in the region is not in favor of such solution. So it's very important to understand that interventionism is monopoly of big powers. So I think that Croatia must be concentrated on soft power and to insist for international law and role of international organizations. That's very important. Now we have, as a country, we have tools, especially our membership to European Union and also membership to NATO. Having in consideration our interest, state interest, national interest, today I think it's of course our position in the European Union, but definitely its region. I think that Croatia can and must do more in international relations, especially through process of reconciliation with neighboring states. It's very important to recognize that we are not capable to modify internal relations and internal issues in particular neighboring countries. I think it's wrong to publicly fight for changement of internal relation in particular countries. namely in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because the result is always negative, always negative. I think that soft diplomacy, as we witnessed it in case of our former Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Pusic, she was very successful, especially promoting European future of a neighboring country. But entering the quarrel, public quarrel with foreign officials is not a good way. Definitely, Croatia is very, very interested to have a stable surrounding. That means states, European-oriented, friendly-oriented members of EU, but there are many problems primarily focused on internal situation and mutual relations between countries in the Southeast Europe. So firstly, there is visible and huge instability of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's big internal problem for that country with very important international consequences. So if we can support some processes, but soft diplomacy is key issue, not fighting with foreign officials, then it can contribute to even to our security and to our position in the international community. It's very important to insist of territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's a key issue. And secondly, of course, to motivate Bosnia and Herzegovina to find compromise. In my opinion, no one, especially no one from region, can change relations between three constitutive nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They can do only themselves. They have to learn magic word. It's compromise. Compromise, they don't have it in the dictionary, and that's one of the biggest problems of that country. Secondly, there is a problem with Serbia-Kosovo relations, but also the policy of present Serbian government. This policy always having some kind of big nation, big Serbian surrounding that is offending the neighboring country, and of course make security risk for all countries, including Croatia. So definitely this area, this triangle, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and additionally Montenegro and North Macedonia, is filled now more and more. Is filled of fight between big global powers, and so we should be very, very careful following what's going on, because any conflict in the region can influence Croatian position. So, how can we contribute? I have to stress that we have open issues with almost all countries in the neighborhood. Some of them, or most of them, are not hot. But it will come the day that we will have problems with some or all countries, because issues are not resolved, especially border issue. We have border issue with Slovenia, of course. This is also pending somehow, with Serbia, with Bosnia and Herzegovina, with Montenegro. And in my opinion, always as a president, I tried to influence governments. I have cooperated with two governments to finally resolve this border issue. How? Definitely we cannot. It's even our mentality in the region, but I think it's common to all states. No one can just say, okay, it's not our territory, someone else. So that make me thinking that the only way how to resolve the border issue is International Court of Justice. I think the countries should agree on procedure before the International Court of Justice, and once forever resolve border issues. Secondly, we have so many issues coming from the war. Missing persons, I think it's emotionally the biggest one. Then individual rights of citizens of different countries, including different citizens, including Croatian citizens, but also citizens of Serbia in Croatia, citizens of Croatia in Serbia, and vice versa. It's among almost all countries. Some economical issues as well, property of former Yugoslavia as well. Some personal issues, including citizenship of different people. So it's very complicated. And of course, we have to understand that one also very sensitive political issue is position of national minorities should be resolved in similar way if it's possible. And definitely in Croatia, we have a very good law on constitutional law on minorities. And I think that model is in principle very good. Probably we have some weaknesses and dilemmas, but as a model, I think it's a good one. Thinking about future Croatian activities, I think that Croatia should be involved in as much as possible in the regional issues. But of course, from time to time, we are burdened by some relics of bad relations and mistrust between countries. So firstly, I think that we have to clarify that ambition to blackmail our neighbors by European membership. So you have to do this or that if you want us to vote for your membership is wrong policy. It was shown that in case Slovenia versus Croatia, definitely. And I think that positive position and especially willingness to resolve important open issues legally is probably the right way how to make relations better in long-term processes, in the shorter-term processes. Secondly, I think that our officials should not interfere or in internal relations in the other countries, and especially not to fight with politicians through journals and through newspapers in the region. It's a wrong approach, but from the other side, it must be clear what values and principles we are fighting for. It's very important. Croatia as a member of EU, we really became better society and better state in the process of accession to the European Union. So we have to present that we really appreciate those important principles that we have had to accept during our accession period. It's not always the case, unfortunately, and definitely human rights, equality of states, willingness to cooperate economically, culturally, and the other way are some of those principles that should be performed by Croatian international foreign policy. Then I think it's very important to be as active as possible in international organizations, starting from European Union and UN, but in the other organizations as well. I didn't have always impression that we invest enough to our presence in different organizations. Okay, it's expensive from time to time. It's not easy to find proper people to act, but I think it will be important goal. I think that we should have candidates for all important or mid-important positions, especially in European Union, Council of Europe. And I always, as a president, I supported our candidates, nevertheless, of their political orientation or party membership. It was shame. It was really shame what happened with the candidature of our distinguished foreign minister, Vesna Pusic, after election, after HDZ won election. They didn't want to support officially exposed candidate Vesna Pusic. She was excellent candidate Vesna. It was really unfair what was done by the government. So Croatian position is today, I think, relatively stable. but there are many challenges. The biggest challenges are in the region today, and I think that the government and the President of the Republic, as institutions who co-create and co-perform foreign policy, should cooperate more and to perform these European values in our relations towards the region and particular states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Josipović, for this overview of the Croatian perspective in the region and in the European Union, and of course for emphasizing Croatia as a soft power and a soft diplomacy power. Our next speaker is Professor Vesna Pusić, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, as well as member of the Croatian Parliament. Ms. Pusić is a university professor, author of several books and more than 50 scientific papers, and was also a candidate for the position of the Secretary General of the United Nations in 2016. Professor Pusić will speak about deblocking Western Balkans, EU, and Russia.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me at the conference. I never tire, and I think it's always important to remind ourselves that successful foreign policy means that your influence and your importance is greater than your size and economic strength. This, I would say, is definition of a successful foreign policy, or to translate it into simpler terms, when you are smarter than you look. Croatia has occasionally been smarter than we look, or than our, let's say, size and economic strength would justify, and there have been some occasions in which we succeeded in that. I would say that at the moment we are in our foreign policy, as they say here, at a positive zero, meaning our Prime Minister defined our position at a meeting, I think last month, with all our ambassadors, saying we want to be a stable, pro-European, let's say, Central European country, not unlike our neighbors, that specifically he emphasized, not causing a problem and not being a disruptor. I think that's what you would call a positive zero. This is definitely something I would subscribe to. However, I would also aspire, let's say, to maybe some additional objectives that Croatia could, and I think should have. The possibility for having, let's say, a say or greater influence than our size would otherwise justify comes from our location, and from the fact that on this location we actually managed, as the last country who managed to do that, from this part of Europe, we managed to enter the European Union now 8 years ago already. So we potentially could have a beneficial, unfortunately also a negative, but let's look at the positive side. We can have a beneficial influence on the region because many different reasons. We share more or less the same language. We share the same political history and understanding of all the obstacles and difficulties of transition and development from a one-party state into a, let's say, multi-party democracy that, of course, means way more than just having many parties and having multi-party elections, as we have seen in the recent years in the European Union. I might return to this issue. In the region, we have two key issues at this point in time. One is the region's neglect by the European Union and on its way to the European Union. All the 6 countries of the region, that is countries of former Yugoslavia who are not members of the European Union plus Albania, are in some stages, different stages of their accession to the European Union, and originally were highly motivated. In the meantime, through different missed opportunities, a number of things that happened, including the fact that European Union of today is very different from the European Union of 2004, so the first expansion to the east, or even 2013 when Croatia entered. European Union of today is divided value-wise. There are actually 2 different sets of values within the European Union, political values. One set is what we call the European values. And it's very important to remember that European values is a term, and they would exist even if they didn't exist in reality anywhere in Europe. Those are non-discrimination, equality, democratic culture, rule of law, rights of minorities of all kinds, and high levels of protection, human rights, etc. That's the freedom of the press, of course. That's what we call the European values, and they're alive and exist in the European Union. However, there is also another set of values that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has called illiberal democracy, which is, I would say, squaring the circle. It is really oxymoron, but meaning that democracy equals multi-party elections. Full stop. All the other things, in other words, who wins the elections has the right to do whatever he wants. And it's actually in Europe, it's only he. So there are no women prime ministers or presidents that are part of that illiberal democracy set of values. So in that sense, for our neighbors to the east and south, who are not yet members of the European Union, but are in different stages of hopefully accession, that has also been sending mixed signals, let's say. What does it mean? And in that sense, Croatia started having, I would say, positive influence, but then somehow withdrew from that role. And at the same time, these neighbors in the region, I would say, got disappointed or to some extent turned away from their original zeal and their original focus and objective on joining the European Union and going through the entire transformation process that entails. And in that sense, I think European Union has lost some of its transformative power and some of its transformative influence. At the same time, I think it's very important to emphasize that what is called the Western Balkans is not the antechamber of Europe. It is European Union's courtyard. It is surrounded by the territory of the European Union. And if European Union wants to have and play a role on the global scene, it has to be able to resolve these issues and somehow consolidate its courtyard. So its first step is consolidating its territory in the Western Balkans. I will come back to that just to mention the other issue that is at the moment, I think, important and where Croatia could have maybe smaller influence than on this first issue, but could have an influence. The main disruptor at the moment in the Western Balkans. And you could hear that from both people who are against it and people who are in favor of it, is Russia. Russia is very present in the Western Balkans. I think it has its reason, and some of the problems we are facing, I think, could be and should be addressed by the European Union. And in some ways, some problems in the Western Balkans cannot and will not be resolved before re-establishment of a dialogue between European Union and Russia. On the first issue, I am completely aware of the fact that although European Union missed a lot of opportunities and made some serious mistakes, especially, for instance, regarding North Macedonia, and the enormous efforts it has put into meeting all the criteria and all the resolving all the issues in order to start negotiations, not starting negotiations with North Macedonia. And you sometimes have the feeling that there is no one at home. I mean, there is no one taking care of the business of the European Union. At the moment, that is to some extent actually the case. The Germans are putting together their government, so they're not going to deal with other issues until that happens. The French have presidential elections next April, so they're also focused on their domestic issues. And without them, the European Union is basically running on empty in a way, or running in place, and not dealing with its own interest, or with somehow implementing policies that are its own interest. Serbia and Montenegro, who are negotiating, have not opened any chapters in 2 years. So everything is somehow put on the back burner, as if the Western Balkans somehow doesn't belong to anybody. It's nobody's territory. This is not Russia's attitude. Russia is very active in the Western Balkans, and all the local disruptors, such as, for instance, the leader of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, to some extent also his Croatian counterpart in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Dragan Čović. But Dodik is here way more pronounced because he has way more influence and administrative unit, let's say, and way more people. His entire arrogance, disruptiveness, and courage in disruptiveness comes from the support he gets from Russia and the backing he gets from Russia. And for years, it was attributed to Serbian politics, which I think was right to a large extent. But I would say at the moment, Serbian politics is more hostage to the two politics of Milorad Dodik than vice versa, because of this Russian support. That is also the case in Montenegro. So they're focused on this region. And this is something that Croatia might be able to understand and bring to the European table. And the issue, I think, here is not that Russia is so excited about Bosnia-Herzegovina or Dodik or even the Balkans. Although, they might, if this lasts a little longer, they might actually get used to this. It is that Russia has actually, its policies has become worse since the breakdown in communication with the European Union. And that started in 2014. After that, we had Ukraine and Crimea. Sanctions followed sanctions, and I think rightly so. But with that came almost complete breakdown in communication between the European Union and Russia. We share a continent, and if you don't talk, you can't solve problems. And Western Balkans definitely cannot be solved exclusively by mobilizing Western Balkan forces, because the disruption and the support for disruption is coming from Russia in its attempt, in my opinion, to engage European Union in communication. It is using the Western Balkans as a chessboard. Unfortunately, Russia is the only one playing at the moment. And the other side, meaning European Union and to some extent United States, preoccupied with other things, are actually mostly looking on or talking to the pawns. By talking to the pawns in this chess game, nothing is going to be resolved. Through Croatia's understanding of this environment, let's say, and the importance of, I would say, diplomatic relations, the importance of talking, because if you don't talk, there is no way that you can resolve any issue diplomatically or in any other way for that matter, except through conflict. And this is something that A, we have some experience in, B, it's actually about us too, because we can be 10 times member of the European Union. If the region is destabilized, that will definitely have an effect on us. And this is something where a small country like ours can contribute. There are at least 4 or 5 different options that could also increase and resurrect, let's say, resuscitate the EU enthusiasm, the European Union accession enthusiasm in the countries of the region that have been circulated and that are not at the moment part of the European Union institutions discussion. I can maybe remind you just of it without explaining because I've used up my time, but it is the Western Balkan countries joining the European and meeting criteria and joining the European Economic Area and leaving everything else for later. The other is using the example of the Baltic states before 2004, where the 3 Scandinavian states served as kind of mentors and Sherpas on their way to the EU membership. There is the model of the 4 stages accession that was presented recently by the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group. And there is, of course, always the possibility of simply opening negotiations, which is way soon, or let's say a long way away from membership. Opening negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, which would send a positive signal to the region, been promised and have met all the criteria a long time ago and still didn't happen. These are things that are being floated around that scientists, social scientists, political scientists have discussed, laid out as models, and that have not been, let's say, put on the agenda of the European institutions. This is something that a country like Croatia could do. And this is something that, in my opinion, could definitely, let's say, prevent or contribute to prevention of
spatial planning and member of the Croatian parliament, as well as former ambassador of Croatia to the Russian Federation. Mr. Kovacevic is a professor, philosopher, author of 3 books, and editor of several journals. The topic is strategy for the future or for the past. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference. Then I would like to thank President Josipović and Minister Pusic for their detailed overview of present situation in the region, European Union, and globally, and for detailed proposals which have been presented here. So there is almost no space for me to add something, but I will try. Of course, I subscribe what the President and Minister have said, but I would not subscribe certain aspects of current Croatian foreign and security policy. And it will be visible from my short remarks. As a small country, Croatia cannot and must not compete with major global powers in regard to absolute amount of military expenditures. But if Croatia is or intends to be a smart country, she has to develop strategic way of thinking to be able to understand global to present and future challenges. A current security framework for Croatia is NATO. NATO membership pursues certain guarantees against possible immediate security threats from a neighboring region. In that respect, NATO is efficient deterrence mechanism. If there is no immediate military threat, this means that Croatia has relatively comfortable situation to define her specific national security interests in line with NATO and EU strategic guidelines. As a NATO member state, Croatia can give inputs in the process of defining alliances, strategies, and policies. I would like to hear a stronger Croatian voice in favor of such NATO policies which will serve to its member states' security interests. NATO involvement in provocative activities in South China Sea could be understood rather as destabilization effort than as a step toward peace and stability. If such moves are not accompanied by intensive multilateral diplomatic talks on security issues with all regional stakeholders, it's not realistic to expect relaxation of tensions in that specific region, and the relevance of tensions in that region is of global importance. On the other side, EU military capabilities are almost non-existent. Significant amount of EU member states' military expenditures does not mean much without common European security strategy and common European foreign policy. PESCO, permanent structure of cooperation, existent model of military cooperation inside EU, is closer to caricature of serious military activities than to a promising model for the future structure of European military force. Declared intention to achieve European strategic autonomy could not be materialized without changing of Lisbon Treaty. Unfortunately, discussion on this issue is not on the agenda of ongoing conference of the future of Europe. But this does not mean that we have to give up. On the contrary, we have to try to initiate discussions on these aspects of European security, including global and regional security, as well as our national security issues. A key Croatian input to these discussions should be insistence on inclusive multilateralism, which encompasses all stakeholders and not only like-minded parties. Multilateralism, which does not include ideologically and culturally different partners, is not real multilateralism. Without readiness to accept even most challenging diplomatic tasks, we will not be, there will not be space to improve security and to maintain peace. Main purpose of European and our national defense capabilities should be deterrence of possible adversaries. As far as I understand, EU and Croatia do not intend to invade countries in neighboring regions. If this is true, this means that our national security strategy and military doctrine should be based on development of deterrence capabilities, not predominantly on offensive weapons. That's why I think that our Croatian decision to buy combatant airplanes was mistaken. To achieve a threshold of 2% of GDP to defense expenditures, it would not be it would be much more reasonable to invest more than 5% of GDP in scientific research and technological development of dual-use technologies. Our strategy should be deterrence, not offensive. Our strategy should be effective defense. Aeroplanes are technology of the past. Drones are technology of the present. We have to participate in development of technologies of the future. Our main goal should be promotion of tolerance, understanding, multilateralism, and peace. And I think that deterrence strategy much better accommodates to these goals than buying of offensive military weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for sharing your thoughts. And of course, the investments in research and science is crucial for a country. And we will hear later in the panels about the emerging technologies and of course the Croatian part in it. And our last speaker in this panel is Krševan Antun Dujmović from the Institute for Development and International Relations. Mr. Dujmović is the coordinator for international cooperation of the Croatian Association for International Studies. His areas of interest include the EU's communication and enlargement policy and the West's relation to Ukraine, Russia, and the countries of the South Caucasus. The biggest challenges for the functioning and for the security of the European Union from
conflict in Ukraine. We have actually a frozen conflict, but sometimes erupting, occasional erupting conflict in east of Europe, in Ukraine. And I would say these are not the best times for European Union and European integration. I'm a person that has been involved for almost the past 20 years in the process, in information campaigns for Croatian citizens. And I'm in a way saddened to see that we are really in the peak of the biggest crisis that the European Union has faced in its history. Just a year ago, we saw Brexit. It was also a sad moment. And I mean, with the UK being a major military, economic, political power in the world, permanent power in the Security Council of the United Nations. What should we do? How should we perceive the situation, and of course Croatia's role in it? So Croatia, as Mrs. Pusic just mentioned a few minutes ago, is a member for almost 8.5 years. I think personally, it's not just a great thing and a great event for Croatia, and for us who live here, we see that this EU accession is basically not just the catalyst, but the engine, the motor of our economic progress. We saw 6 years of a backslog in Croatia, a long recession starting in late 2008 till 2014. And I would see that now it's quite visible. I mean, we see all the benefits, and we see how much more advanced Croatia is to the countries in the region. And Croatia has, in a way, has to be present in the region, but also has to catch up with other European EU member states. So I would name like 5 challenges that we face at the moment in the European Union, and Croatia is part of that. So as I mentioned region, I would first refer to the region. What I see is a major obstacle for security in the region and for the whole of European Union is the frozen process of the European enlargement. Ever since in foundation of the EU, we saw waves. We saw the biggest wave, the 5th wave actually, in 2004. It was a major success story when all of the post-communist countries joined the European Union. And there was always this enlargement fervor and zeal, as Mrs. Pusic put it. And we saw a lack of this zeal, and it's not just because of the countries. They're in poor shape in terms of fighting organized crime, in terms of omnipresent corruption. It's also largely due to the problems that the EU faces itself. As I mentioned before, especially with the Brexit, I think that European Union is puzzled and doesn't have a clear initiative, and at this moment doesn't really know what to do with the region. We see this region, of course, it is fully surrounded by EU member states, but it's also a soft underbelly of Europe, and we see a sprawling influence of other outside the Europe regional and global powers, and this could be a major threat for European stability. And I think it's definitely time, even in this COVID pandemic and the ongoing crisis and the reflection period where the European Union is trying to define its future, it has to have the capacity to finish this European integration process, because without the regional conflicts not resolved, it could backfire, and it could be a threat for the security and for the functioning of the whole of the European Union. So Europe needs to come back to the region and not leave it to the other powers. And from here, I would step to point number 2, and this is the growing influence of global and regional powers. And we talked about Russia. Russia is mostly focused on destabilizing the region. It cannot offer too much. And Russia is, in a way, frustrated. It felt that it was fooled by the West. They were full of big expectations in the 90s, and then NATO and the Americans, mostly the Americans, and they're followed by other Europeans. They decided to extend NATO, to extend the European Union, and even offered a membership action plan to Ukraine and even the countries in the South Caucasus, like Georgia. And now Russia is sort of paying back, and their influence in the region is mostly destructive. They don't want the continuation of European Union process. But we haven't talked about much. We mentioned China and the China South Sea, but not the Chinese influence in the region, which is also significant and real important. I would first and foremost mention here Serbia and Montenegro. What we see as a result of COVID-19 pandemics is that Europe is going to restrain from strengthening further its relations with China, but still they're present, and we have to see the outcome of how things will unfold around Taiwan and in China. and Europe has to actually define its position toward China, because what we see just a year ago, we saw negotiations on a comprehensive agreement on investment, CAI, between China and the European Union, and at the same time, European Union was imposing sanctions to China because of the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang province in west of China. So I would say that the European Union does not have a clear strategy on what to do with China, and this sort of lack of ambition and lack of initiative has been, the advantage has been taken by the Americans. We just a month ago organized and signed this AUKUS pact. Australians kicked out the French from the submarines deal, and they will introduce American submarines. So we see growing presence of the British, of the UK, and its allies like the Australians and Americans in the Indo-Pacific. And at this moment, we don't see any concrete initiative of the Europeans of either joining this club of AUKUS or actually going the other direction, strengthening relations with the Chinese, despite these tensions primarily between Washington and Beijing. Of course, we also have to mention a regional power, not a global power, but regional power like Turkey, with its sprawling influence in the region, especially in Kosovo, Albania, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And it's not to be neglected. Turkey's influence is growing. We saw what happened last year in Nagorno-Karabakh, and with the support to the Armenia. And this blitz, it could not have been accomplished without support of Turkey. So a country with great ambitions, and rest assured they will use any sign of weakness of the European Union to strengthen their position in the region and through the region in Europe. I will also mention as a threat to European security, and especially to Croatia, a possibility of changing borders in Europe. We saw initiatives in the past few years to make territorial swaps between Kosovo and Serbia. And luckily, this initiative was not supported by European powers, primarily, I would say EU powers, not European powers, if you consider UK. UK was in support of this, but major EU powers led by Germany, they were against this initiative, and this is quite a positive move and a way and a signal that shows that Europe should have initiative, and that the European Union should be quite adamant when it comes to protection of its own interests. But because with these initiatives that mostly come from Washington, we could see eruption of tensions. We could see, a chain of reactions, spillover effect. So the spillover effect could affect North Macedonia. It could affect Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro. We'd see what's going on. And at the beginning we said, yeah, the situation truly is much better than the 90s. But ever since the Dayton Accords, the situation has not been worse. So for the past 25, 26 years, it hadn't been worse. And we haven't seen more tension than now at this moment. And the changing amendment of the borders in the Balkans would open Pandora's box. We see similar initiatives to change borders across Europe. And this is a great threat to European integration. Instead of being more integrated, we see rising nationalism. We saw it in Catalonia, we saw it in Scotland, and other parts of Europe. And these countries could, or these regions could, rather regions or provinces, whatever, they could look into this as a precedent, and I see it as a major threat for the stability of Europe, and especially of Croatia. We are, and we've always been a buffer zone between Central Europe and the Balkans. What I also see, and coming to point number 4 here, is the lack of democratic. That I see democratic deficit in European Union. The problem is that as we were losing the zeal and fervor to get further integrated and to get the European enlargement process, there is and also the lack of cohesion and solidarity between the member states. And I think that's the foundation of European integration ever since it started. For the past centuries, Europe has always been embroiled in different wars, and what we need is always solidarity, and we need democracy. And this is what is really the trademark, the hallmark of European Union in the world, being a bastion of guarantor of human rights and democracy. I would also here point an example of a project that's driven a wedge between European states. Germany is a major European power, and other countries in Eastern Europe, smaller countries, mid-sized countries, small countries. I would mention here Poland, the Baltic states, that had really traumatic period, in the past and during the communist era and being dominated by the USSR. And of course, I have to mention the project of Nord Stream 2 that's driven big division, and we saw this lack of solidarity and unity in European Union, because on one part you have one country that is pushing for this energy project, which is diminishing Europe's independence on fossil fuels. We have to say it in this era of fighting climate change. Fossil fuels from Russia and other countries, they're sparking an outcry all of Europe, and regardless of this, the process has come to its completion. So I also see it as a lack of democracy and respect and understanding and cohesion and unity among EU member states. What I also see, this way I'm coming to point number 5, is the lack of EU's unity and global voice. I see it as a major problem, because here we have 450 million people, the second biggest economy. It's still bigger than China, and major trading power, and one nuclear power within that's France. And we see that this integration, this European Union construction is toothless. And this is being taken as an advantage for other powers outside Europe, with this lack of global voice, with this lack of global initiative, even in our own courtyard, in the Balkans now, in the Western Balkan countries, this lack of initiative, and in our immediate neighborhood, in South Caucasus, in Ukraine. It's been taken, the advantage has been taken by other countries, other powers, like as we said before, primarily Russia, but then we have China as another player that's also coming into Europe, and regional players like Turkey, and even I would mention Saudi Arabia, and even Iran, and they could take advantage of this weakness of European Union to project this power in its immediate neighborhood, lack of initiative to have a global voice, to be a global player, and the lack of willingness to promote what is our core value. And as we said before, human rights, protection of the rule of law. This is something which is our hallmark, and that needs to be protected by all cost. And here, the European Union should be the beacon, should be the leader, and not even matched by other Western countries like Canada, United States, Australia. So to sum it up, these are the 5 points that I would point out as the greatest threats to our future. And but I believe this is just temporary, and that we will come up with solutions. We've been doing that in our history, and I believe that the European Union will find its way out of this backlog, and that Croatia will follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dujmovic. Since we don't have time for a discussion, I would just like to remind that this conference is a part of the Platform Conference for the Future of Europe, and that the conclusions of this conference would be a valuable input sent to the European Commission for the overall conclusions and an overall report in spring 2022. And we think that this conference really, as it has started, has valuable proposals, valuable ideas, that the European Commission could use for shaping the future of Europe and having a vision for its long-term future. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you, Professor Josipović, Professor Pusić, Ambassador Kovačević, and Mr. Dujmović. I would suggest now a short break of a few minutes, and then we continue with the second panel on science and security.